Welcome back to our midweek Bible classes. It's good to have you with us in this first midweek class of February. We're in Luke chapter 14, verse 15. We're right in the middle of a story. Sorry I had to break it off last time, but we want these to go about a half hour so that you can fit them into your life a lot easier than if they went very much longer. So what's happened? Jesus has gone to the house of a Pharisee. He does that more than once in Luke, as you've noticed. And as he's teaching them, he's already taught them a couple things about taking the lower seat so you may be invited up and not invited down, that sort of thing. Those stories we know very well. We also know this next story very well, but I don't really think we catch all of the meaning. And so we need to do some time travel here and go back 2,000 years and put ourselves into their mindset. They are listening. They have absorbed what Jesus is saying at this party. Please remember, in the New Testament, the Pharisees are generally the bad guys. But that is not true about Pharisees as a whole. In the first century and even before, they were the group that were trying to get back to the Bible, let's say, back to Scripture, back to worshiping the way God wanted you to worship and to live your life under the rule of God. So they were the restoration movement of their day. It is a fact that they were looked upon as strict but good, the good guys. They weren't like the liberal Sadducees who denied almost all of the spiritual aspects of Scripture and who really ran to put their hands around new Greek culture. They weren't like the Essenes, who were the nutcases. I'm using their viewpoint here. Who would retreat to the desert saying we're giving up on civilization entirely. These were the good guys. Well, then why in the New Testament are they looked upon as the bad guys? Well, because in every restoration movement, in every fundamentalist movement, in every conservative movement, you also get it in the liberals, hush. In every conservative movement, you have the fringe who take it to 11 and who push it way too hard. Those are the ones that bump up against Jesus. It's those guys. Now, in this particular dinner, not so much. In this particular dinner, these guys were listening and they were really getting it. And in fact, after Jesus did that whole thing about, don't give a luncheon or a dinner for your friends who can then give you one, but rather do things for people who can't do things for you. One guy got it so powerfully that he wanted to be all in. And so in verse 15 of chapter 14, Luke, he says, one of the dinner guests, on hearing this, said to him, "Blessed is anyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." Well, I love baked goods as much as anybody, more than most, frankly. I think it's my greatest temptation. In fact, when we run out of pie after Christmas, I think, how long is it till Christmas? I love baked goods, but the concept of blessed is he who eats bread in the kingdom of God, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't just mean that you're going to be up there and you're going to be well fed. To eat bread with somebody, I've said this so many times, you are who you eat with. You are extending fellowship. This is why in the Psalm 23, it says, "You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies." So my enemies, therefore, are able to see God fellowships me and he loves me. And so this fellow is saying, wow, it'll be so blessed to be actually fellowshipped and accepted by our God. What a blessing this is. He's not wrong. He's got it. But Jesus feels like we need to do a little gut check here. He does it through story, which is really the most powerful way to get something through to someone else. When a politician wants to be against a tax, for example, they won't just say, "I'm against a tax," unless they don't want to be reelected. What they'll do is they'll bring up a poor person and saying, "Why should this person have to pay a tax? Look at this guy. He works over here in the mill. His wife has to take in laundry, and they're having to pay tax for these people over here who aren't." So it shows you a story. Or if somebody wants to raise your taxes, they won't say, I want to take more money from you. No, no. They'll bring out some poor people and they'll say, these poor people have nothing. And it would be best for us to share with them, for the government to share. They never say, take it out of your pocket. But it's a story. Do you see what I mean? It's a story. And that's what the best commercials are, too, are a story about the medication or about the food or about the clothes. So Jesus is going to use a story. And it's one you know, but let's have a look at some twist of meanings, shall we? Then Jesus said to him, someone gave a great dinner and invited many. Remember, he just had talked about don't throw dinners for people who can throw dinners for you. Treat other, do things for people that can't do anything back for you. At the time, the dinner he'd sent his slave to, at the time for the dinner, he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, come, for everything is ready now. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, I bought a piece of land, and I must go out and see it. Please accept my regrets. And another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm going to try them out. Please accept my regrets. And another said, I've just been married, and therefore I can't come. Interesting start to that married life. So the slave returned and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and said to his slave, go out at once into the streets and lanes of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame. And the slave said, sir, what you ordered have been done, and there's still room. Then the master said to the slave, go out into the roads and lanes and compel people to come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those who were invited will taste my dinner. Ooh. By the way, that's the end of the story. And he doesn't say, now what this means is, and we get no reaction from the Pharisees that's written down here. So what is this all about? He's saying, a man makes this massive dinner, and he invites his friends to come. Well, his friends are already his friends. They're already in fellowship. Now, it could be that this friendship is a business thing or a status or a class thing. We could argue those points. But the fact is, there's a lot of reciprocity here. These people are buying land, for goodness sake, and 5 yoke of oxen. That's a lot of oxen. And they're getting married, and that was a big, expensive thing to do. So these people have means. And so the guy is preparing this table, and they don't feel a need to come. Why do they not feel a need to come? Well, one, they have options. Options are great. I love options. But options are also an enemy to cohesion. Now think about that. Once upon a time, everybody that you went to work with was watching the same television show. Might have been Milton Berle, or talk to your grandparents. It might have been Milton Berle, or it might have been the Honeymooners, or the like, because you only got a couple of channels if you had a TV at all. And on the radio, you listened to certain programs. Everybody did. And then you talked about it. Well, then as the proliferation of new TV stations and radios came out, and then look at the magazines that used to be there. There used to be stores that were just chock full of hundreds and hundreds of different monthly and weekly magazines, most of which are out of print now, and most of the rest of them are going out of print and going digital. But you had all of these options, and now you're not reading the same things. A person listening to MS, well, it's called MS Now at present instead of MSNBC. If you listen to them and CNN, or if you listen to Fox and Newsmax, you will have a completely different bubble, a completely different set of information. We all know that near the end of December, we don't all know, that's kind of the point. Near the end of December, a massive fraud was found in Minnesota, where up to 60 different child care, autism care, transportation for the elderly companies were registered to a single address. And that address is closed. And it has never been a business. It has merely received millions upon millions of dollars from us, from the taxpayer. All of this. Yet for the first 3 weeks of this fraud that was found, it was not reported on the major networks, except for one. And whenever CNN got around to doing it, they decided to investigate the people who were investigating the fraud. Now, there was some correction on that later as the snowball kept rolling down that mountain and getting bigger. But the point is, if you'd only listened to this side, you've been horrified. If you only listened to this side, you wouldn't have known a thing. So it might be good to listen to both, right? Just an idea. But here these people were in their bubble, in their friendship group. They had options. They didn't have to be over there. I can be over here. And sometimes options are good. Like, I like options on a menu. I don't want to walk in and they'll say, you're having rice. I'd like to have options. But when it comes to our news listening, there are real impacts to that. Here, the impacts were real in that I don't have to get food at your house. I got food at my house. I don't have to go over there. So, hey, thanks, sorry, please accept my regrets. So they were polite about it. So the man decides, I'm going to go get the people who don't have any food and bring them in. And he does. And the servant goes, we still got room. And he says, go out and grab everybody you can grab. Now notice that there were no conditions on this. Those people didn't have to be clean, of good reputation. They didn't have to be his friends. They didn't have to be non-criminals, for goodness sake. It was all just bring them in. Jesus is teaching the Pharisees that they have barriers up, barriers to fellowship, that I'm happy to fellowship people who agree with me. I'm happy to fellowship those of certain status and whose behavior is acceptable to my group. I'm happy to feed and clothe and like, but I want it to be done in a particular way that my group approves of. And he contrasts that with God, who says, the table's here. You can already fellowship with God now. You don't have to wait for heaven. You can fellowship with God right now, but if you choose not to, you need to know that God's also going to be filling this table with people you don't like. People you would consider beggars, the bottom end of society, religiously unacceptable. He's going to fill those tables with them too. Are you willing to come to that table? Now a lot of us had that struggle on holidays in times past where there might have been one family member and you that were just completely at odds. And so you would ask the person hosting the meal, don't invite that person. And they would say, well, they're my daughter or my aunt or my cousin, and they're coming. And I want you there too. It's uncomfortable, isn't it? Think of how uncomfortable you'll be if you're a Pharisee thinking only you and your group are approved by God, to find that he's out there going under the highways and byways, grabbing people from under bushes, saying, come on in, come on, let's go, come on in. Everybody, come on in. I tell you, none of those invited will taste my dinner, because if you won't fellowship who God fellowships, how comfortable are you going to be at that table? We don't want to wait. The jokes are all over. People will say, well, the Baptists think they're the only ones going to heaven, or Church of Christ think they're the only ones going to heaven, or Catholics think they're the only ones going to heaven. Won't they be surprised when they get there? The point of Jesus' story here is that we shouldn't be surprised when we get there, because here we should be opening our tables. Here we should be opening our purses, our time, putting at risk our standing in the community for the purpose of accepting others. Isn't it interesting that in all of the list of gifts that God gives people, I don't care whether you go to 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, or wherever you go, that the gift of judgment is never listed, but mercy is. The Pharisees needed to open their minds and open their fellowship. I recently spoke to someone and asked if they could fill in if, perchance, I ended up in hospital or I wasn't able to speak that Sunday. And they were rather overwhelmed, and they said yes. And I could see the question on the man's face. And I said, if you and I were to go today and grab a sheet of paper and start listing all of our theological points and where we stood, I'm sure we would find some differences. But your heart is full of Christ and you care for Christ people. That's all I'm interested in. I have no interest in building a little theological edifice and saying, my people speak here and my people do things here. No, no, no. This is open to Christ. So what if somebody gets up on Sunday that I've asked to fill in and they say, well, I disagree with Patrick on such and such? Who cares? They might be right. I've been wrong before. In fact, I'm rather good at being wrong and then learning that I was wrong. And I do hope and pray that I'm learning up until the day that I die and that I'm changing up until the day that I die. Because I don't believe that I have once and for all understood all things. The Pharisees did. And I used to be one of them in heart. Never a member of a Pharisee group, but you get the point. In my heart, I figured I've got it all sorted. I've got the formula. But I didn't have the person of Christ who would go out and say, let's bring these other people in and see how comfortable you are. It was a challenge to them. We do not see their response to this. Again, I would like to know more about this. But the things I would like to know more about, that if the Bible put them in, it would be 3 times as long. So God just gave us enough to point us to Jesus. So let's go down to verse 25. Now large crowds were traveling with him, and he turned and said to them, oh boy, this is going to be a tough one. People don't like this one. I would rather he phrased it a different way, but this is what Jesus said. Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Well, that's uncomfortable. What are we going to do with this? I don't really think you can wave this off and say, well, Luke misquoted Jesus. I don't think you can do that. Luke seemed to be particularly good at this job. So what does it mean? Am I required to hate my father, hate my sister, who, if you're listening, sis, I don't hate you. I have a fantastic sister. Am I required to hate life itself? It is a Semitic way of speaking, which means willing to set aside, willing to drop off. If you love it, you embrace it. If you hate it, you let it move off. You're willing to let it. So why? Because he says, if you want to follow me, you've got to carry my cross. You got to carry a cross. And we think of this and we go, well, everybody has their cross to bear, and I kind of get it. No, you don't. Because they didn't use that expression back then. He's walking down roads that have crosses ever so often. And these people have seen people writhing in pain for days, dying on crosses. Crosses were not looked upon as anything positive, but rather as the most horrible things that you might imagine. I don't really recommend the movie Braveheart because it has little bits of history in it, but most of it is not. But the very end, spoiler alert, it's been a few hundred years, you should have figured it out by now. When William Wallace is hung, drawn, and quartered, Mel Gibson always likes to put in the torture scenes. That's a big thing for Mel Gibson. You might look at that and go, ah! And here, what if your pastor turned to you Sunday and said, if you're not willing to be hung, drawn, and quartered, you can't be my disciple? I think most of us would look around, look at each other and go, I'm out. I'm done. I'm going to go to the church that just needs 10% of my paycheck after bills and when it's available. Jesus is throwing down a challenge. He's drawing a line in the sand and saying, if you cross this, you may very well end up on one of those. And you have to be willing to not be taking care of your father and mother and your sister and brother because you're hanging on a cross. Because you've lost your life rather than living that life, supporting them, caring for them. What are you going to do? He's thinning the herd here. He has a large crowd, but it's not going to be large for long. Not if he keeps talking like this. And he will keep talking like this. So what are we going to do here? Now, I'm really glad he didn't talk like this a whole lot, because it would have broken my heart to have to keep going, do I really want the nails? Do I really want the whips? Because that's what it may cost to follow this guy. And I'd really like to be able to take care of my wife and my family. So is Jesus saying don't take care of them? No, because elsewhere he's made it very, very plain that that is an absolute duty that you have to care for your family. So what is he trying to say? Well, let's look on. He's saying figure out the cost before you decide to do anything. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and was not able to finish. Or, and again, status enters into that, doesn't it? Or what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions. Well, do you remember the rich young ruler? We talked about him. And Jesus said, sell everything you have and give it to the poor. The fellow wasn't willing to do that. He went away sorrowfully because he was very rich. Once again, is Jesus calling us to sell all our possessions? No. And we can see this because the way this played out in the early church. In Acts chapter 2, the people shared their goods freely so that no one was in need. And then a few chapters later, people were selling houses or bits of land to support the poor in their own community, the Christian community. Ananias and Sapphira famously sold property and then said, here is the money we got for the property, when it was only a portion of it. And Peter goes, wait, when you own the property, that was yours. That was yours to do with as you wish. You didn't have to sell it. So why are you selling it and then lying to God about it? What you have, you have. And God is not asking you to live out here with no clothes, no food. No. This is hyperbole to make a point. You have to be willing to let go of things. I know of a man who wanted to spend his life on the mission field, had a real heart for the people in a particular continent. I won't give any details here. And he would go over for weeks at a time, but he kept trying to talk his wife into it. And his wife literally, I know I was there in one of the conversations, said, I am not putting my nice things into storage, and I'm not selling my things for other people to sit on my couch. She was locked in. Now, granted, it's a real good possibility she wasn't a good candidate to be a missionary wife. And not everybody is. And so I'm not trying to condemn her. What I'm trying to bring up here by an extreme example is that we can get so attached to our things that we just don't move and we don't follow Jesus because we're attached to our stuff. Now, that can also be our times and opportunities. Whenever I lived in Colorado, we had fierce competition every weekend for people's attention. And that was the mountains. Whenever especially during the winter, you'd get up on Sunday morning and look out and the crowd would be half there. The other half is skiing because they get Sundays off and the mountains are there. Well, I'm not a legalist. I don't believe that you have to darken the doors of the church building to be saved. But whenever I asked them later, do you guys do church up in the chalets? And do you put aside some moments? Most of them, and very embarrassed, said no, they didn't. They had allowed, we only have limited time to mean, well, God is an afterthought. It doesn't take a lot of time to think about God, to do an act of communion and prayer. It doesn't. But they had allowed God to be shoved out by mountains. And I get it. I love mountains too. And I live in Tennessee now. By the time you're listening to this, have been here 12 years, which is longer by far than I've lived anywhere in my life. But I like going out to the Rocky Mountains time to time, have a look at those. Or even, my wife calls them hills, but the mountains of West Virginia. Those are amazing and beautiful to me too, mainly because they're filled with West Virginians, and I have a great part of my heart that still lives up there. Moving on, he's not asking you to do the impossible. He's saying, well, are you willing? Do you look at everything in your house? Look at your bank account. Look at everything you've got there. Ask yourself, whenever you hit a real super important one, ask yourself, do I love that more than Jesus? No, I don't know that you're actually going to do this, but just do it as a thought experiment. Because that's a way of kind of getting in our mindset. If I have to get rid of this to follow Jesus, would I? By the way, I've actually done that with some of my objects, my books, my guitars, and the like, and said, yeah. And in fact, I've sold most of my guitars. I still have probably more than I need, but I'm about a third of what I had even 5 years ago. That's okay. I decided, something, the grands don't seem to be interested in playing guitars. I don't want my wife to be stuck with these things. So if the money can be put into use, for God to help us survive to do this work, well then let's do that. And so Jesus is being very, very hard here. I can't walk away from that. And he is being very, very shocking here. But he is speaking in hyperbole, that is purposefully over speaking to make a point. Like when your mother said, I've already told you 1,000,000 times. We all know, she knows, we know, it's not 1,000,000 times. But she's making a point. He's saying, are you willing to lose it? Lose it all to follow me? Because he knows that's going to happen to some of these folk. Their own communities are going to try to suck them back in. Their own denominations like Pharisees, Sadducees, or the like are going to try to suck them back in. And of course, when the fall of Jerusalem comes, and the wars occur and the scattering, the diaspora of the Jews, some people aren't going to go with you if you follow Jesus. So, you've got to make your choice. I'll wrap this up with a real quick story. When we lived in Scotland, our baptistry was the Irish Sea. Think the North Sea, but just on the other side of Scotland. Cold. Never, 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 never is going to be anything other than brutally cold. Walking out into that to baptize somebody, that every single time I would have to brace myself, deep breaths, and don't preach them any sermon, Patrick. Just get it done and get back in. I was never tempted to preach them any sermon. We baptized two girls in a November winter gale. I say we. Another guy did it. I helped him get the girls there, my wife and I and his wife, and it was at night, so we had point the cars with the headlights on bright into the sea, and he was the one that taught him, so he was going to baptize him, and I was really thrilled about that. But even when they got back in the car, the heaters are going real big. We're pulling ice out of their hair. So we always, even in the summer, would sing a song before we would enter the water. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. It's a song that they used to sing a whole lot in camps. It's kind of disappeared in recent years, but I think we might need to sing that song as we walk about our house, look at our bank accounts, look at the way we spend our time, and say, where is Jesus in this equation? But that's a decision for you to make. No person can make that for you. None of us have the right to make that for you. So that's between you and God. And God is full of mercy and grace. So don't be afraid to talk to him about it. He's got you. That's it. I hope you have a fantastic week. I look forward to speaking to you next week as we finish just that last little bit of chapter 14 and jump into 15, because we're going to get right back into that. This guy's accepting bad people. Wow. What a thought. Cheers.